All right, welcome back to the Pineapple Couch with B-Rob, episode 104, and we are going to be going over Loki episode 2. Came out Tuesday night at midnight, I guess Wednesday night, early in the morning. I'm going to be joined by Peter Gonzalez to talk all about it. Peter, how you doing, my friend?
I'm doing great. I'm excited to keep getting into this show. It's such a vibe. I love it.
And so I would like to start off this podcast with a hot take, as I usually do. This was by far the best episode of anything on Disney Plus ever. And I would say the only things that I would put near it would be the season 2 finale of Mando, the episode of WandaVision where Agatha Harkness reveals herself, and then maybe the first episode of the show. I thought that it was at that level how great this episode was and how great this series is.
Very high praise. I like that there are specific touch points that you compared it to, because I know last time you did say it was the best episode of Disney Plus, but I like that this time you put it in context with certain things, because I thought it definitely moved quicker than the first episode, which I think was necessary because the first episode was laying the groundwork, but this episode, especially the last 10 minutes, was just
Oh my gosh,
insanity for the MCU in the best way, in similar ways that the other shows were the Flag Smashers. Not the Flag Smashers. Forget the Flag Smashers. Falcon and the Winter Soldier and the Agatha reveal. But yeah, I'm so stoked about this episode.
Yeah, and I mean this is a 6-episode series, Peter. So you mentioned how the last 10 minutes of this it was just going fast and so much is happening. I kind of think that that's what we have for 4 more episodes. I think it's going to be all gas, no brakes.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be constantly a series of what the fuck over and over and over, because they have the ability to do that when you see all the places that were impacted by the last 10 minutes. It's wild, but we only have 6 episodes, which is sad. Like, that makes me sad.
It is, but we do have season 2. Hopefully, I think that was confirmed. And another thing, like to add to the insanity of this, is there's probably still 2 or 3 variants of Loki that we have yet to meet, and we know that those gods of mischief will get up to certainly no good. So let's just get into this episode right off the top, Peter. The title is The Variant. It opens up at a Renaissance fair in Wisconsin in 1985. Some TVA agents show up. A woman is looking at them who is working at the fair. I mean, is that Agatha Harkness?
That's a very interesting thought. She kind of did look like her.
She could blend in there.
That's true. That's very true. I did not think about that, but I like that.
So yeah, that stuck out to me. They track this variant Loki. We assume that they're hunting to a tent, and this variant lays a trap. She mind controls a TVA agent, and she takes basically everyone out. And then Lady Loki kills the last agent, stabs them, and steals a variant tracking device from the TVA, and then kidnaps that lead TV agent, sending us into the opening title. Peter, what did you think about that whole first, I guess, cold open, so to speak?
I liked that we got, it was a little bit more violent than I expected, with some of which we hadn't seen in this show yet. But I did like, what stood out for me was the genius use of Holding Out for a Hero as a song. Yeah. It reminded me of Guardians of the Galaxy, that kind of vibe where it's like, this doesn't make sense, but it's such a sick use of the soundtrack. Like, and it's interesting because the song's about holding out for a hero. So is this Loki variant not necessarily a villain? That's kind of what I had to wonder too. It's like, where are we going with this?
And the music just adds to the overall chaos of a scene so well. And we still need to do eventually our Guardians of the Galaxy 2 talk, because where that movie has flaws, I think it has the best soundtrack of like any movie ever. So it works for me. But again, that's off topic. Time for another pod. So let's go now into after the opening title. We get Loki. He's in the TVA office, learning, studying about TVA shit from a hologram of Miss Minutes. That's not just like a hologram. When it moves, we hear its feet land. So, and it also goes into the computer. So is this some sort of like very futuristic AI we're dealing with, you think?
I think so, because they had the interaction where it's like, are you recorded or are you like not recorded? Like, what's their deal? And she kind of is that middle ground. So again, it's like, I think again lends itself to the weirdness of the TVA, which this episode just made the TVA so much sketchier, in my opinion.
Oh, yeah.
And made me wonder. But I did think it's such an interesting comedic foil to Tom Hiddleston to have this animated clock person as who he's bantering with. I thought that was just genius.
Yeah, and it's all of this is happening to better educate Loki, this variant of Loki, which is yeah, it's a variant of Loki, I guess, still. About how the TVA works and what he needs to know if he is going to go into the field to help assist Mobius and the TVA in tracking down this other variant that was teased at the end of last week. And then so from here, Mobius gives Loki a variant TVA jacket, and they get ready to track this Loki variant back to that Renaissance fair that took place in Wisconsin in 1985. One thing that we see throughout this episode, and it starts here, is Loki continuously calling the other Loki the lesser variant. And I think that is perfect for Loki's character because it's just, I mean, we're talking about the deconstruction of Loki's kind of ego in this show. I mean, he's very insecure. So, of course, he's going to want to make it known, like, oh, that's the lesser one. This is all just, I think, the inner workings of Loki's mind kind of being displayed to us.
Yeah, and I think, again, it speaks to his out of timeness in a sense also, because he's still, even though we had that character growth in episode 1, he's still like the glorious purpose. He's still trying to figure out what his end game is, no pun intended.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that I think that this is something that Mobius is counting on, the fact that he does view this Loki as a lesser Loki.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, from what we've seen at the end of this episode, that certainly makes sense. We get another thing happens here is Mobius is going to show Loki all the other variants. We see a Tour de France winner. We see a blue Loki. We see like a giant, like hulkish Loki, a Viking Loki, and then there's like a Loki with horns. So a bunch of different variants that may be out there that maybe we will see, but we didn't see any of those in the teaser trailers. We did, however, see the like vote for me Loki. So we will be seeing that. That's a variant. But the reason that they're getting Loki on this trip, obviously, is so they can better understand the Loki variant that they are looking for, and how they're getting Loki to cooperate. Peter, is Mobius is kind of teasing and tempting Loki to help by mentioning and kind of like holding out a bone for a dog of like, hey, maybe you'll get to talk to these timekeepers. What did you think of that?
It definitely reminds me again of my Wizard of Oz theories that I got from the first episode.
Oh yeah.
Especially as the episode goes on, it's like, again, you have these figures that you can't get to that are there, these giant space lizards, as Loki calls them, and we're just meant to believe that they're doing good, that they are in charge of everything. So again, because Loki is all about wanting the power and the control, he's willing to bargain with Mobius, so to speak, because it entices him to know, like the audience, who are these people that are supposedly running the entire show.
Yeah, and Loki gravitates towards that, like we saw with Thanos and other various things in the MCU, especially even when he was on Sakaar and Ragnarok. We saw that. So now that group, they go to Wisconsin 1985, and they go to the tent where the variant took down all the TVA agents. And in the tent, Loki puts on a show. This is exactly what you were saying. We still have that glorious purpose. And again, like you said, lesser Loki, because he's trying to pull shit like this. He does this whole like thing about how he knows what the other variant Loki is doing, says a bunch of metaphors. He tries to convince everyone that the other Loki wants him, and he can go get him if they guarantee him an audience with the timekeepers. And after about, what would you say, 20 to 25 seconds, Peter, Mobius finally calls BS, which I thought was great. I thought the comedic timing of Owen Wilson there was really funny. And again, like you said, we're showing that Loki, we still can't trust this dude. What did you take from all that?
I think what's so interesting, I think that Tom Hiddleston does so well, is that you want to root for Loki. You want to root that he's actually doing the right thing. But as this scene shows, he's still playing everyone. And in his mind, he is 10 steps ahead of everyone, and he is trying to get one up everyone. But I think it shows, again, that you can't ever fully trust Loki, because him delaying so that the variant could escape could also plays into his plan, not necessarily somebody else's plan. So it's great to watch, and I think it's just it again speaks to the ability that they're putting into this show.
Yeah, absolutely. And so from there, we now go to Ravonna,
Ravonna. I
Ravonna
did.
Renslayer's office with Mobius. And the one thing in their interaction that we keep that throughout this episode that we're teased at is that there's some sort of other analyst that is working with Ravonna Renslayer that is not Mobius. So really quickly, Peter, let's theorize on who this could be. There's I'll start and see what you
Yes.
think. What if it's a different variant of Mobius?
I think that's an intriguing possibility. I think that would be quite the twist if that's the case. But
Mm-hmm.
part of me also feels like, what if the variant is the Lady Loki or is someone else? Because again,
Yeah.
if we're operating under the assumption that the TBA is shady, the timekeepers are shady, the timekeepers are a smokescreen theoretically for someone like Kang, is this
Yeah.
like is again she double crossing? There's a lot of double crossing on this show
Oh yeah.
essentially,
It's perfect
and
for Loki.
exactly, and kind of changing what you think is going to happen. Because I think the show is a lot about choice and free will. So I think a lot of it is you think this is the path and the motivations, but something else is on the side.
Mm-hmm.
But I think almost she could be working with the other with the Loki variant in a sense too, with the
That would
potential.
be a wild, wild twist that would play out almost immediately in the following episode. So that could be really cool. You mentioned Kang. I mean, I agree. I think that a lot of people are thinking that Kang could be this other person that she is working with, or Kang could just be the timekeepers. Who knows? It could be some sort of council of Kang's situation. But I saw this theory online. Don't remember who I saw it from, so sorry, I'm not crediting you. Um, Someone threw out Reed Richards because he's an aerospace engineer and is so smart. And I am officially just going to say, don't get my hopes up like that. That is not happening. How Reed Richards already knowing about the TVA and all this stuff, like I don't mind if Reed Richards is like somewhat established when he is introduced, but I would like to see Reed Richards not just know everyone and know everything immediately. And we have to see him develop those relationships. I also think, though, that there's a 0% chance that this is Reed Richards, and I don't understand why that theory gained so much traction.
So it's honestly funny that you mentioned that theory. Actually, I had not seen that theory, but before you mentioned that theory, and I was still ruminating on other analysts, but the first thought that came to my mind right now was Victor. What if
Mm,
Victor was the other analyst, which kind of
that could be.
is another entryway for the Fantastic Four in a sense, and he's someone who could have the knowledge.
And he's someone who has dealt with multiversal type things a lot in the comic books. And so if this show is one of the stages of this multiverse saga in the MCU that ends with Multiverse of Madness, certainly having a character, or not ends with Multiverse of Madness, because Quantum Mania kind of comes after that, which I think will deal with it too. I think that having a Kang, something like that, would make a lot of sense in
It's
such a situation.
just it's so hard with these shows. It's such a difficult ride to be on when you have things like WandaVision where you're waiting for Mephisto, where you're waiting for these
Yeah.
certain things. And, it takes a different route. But again, I think part of the reason why we have also yet to see a Spider Man No Way Home trailer is because of this show. Whatever's going to happen here obviously has repercussions into that. So I don't think we're going to get a trailer that's going to show us the multiverse essentially breaking until something further happens along in this show, which is
Hmm.
why I also think it's curious that Black Widow will land in the middle of the Loki showing, because I think that's very strategic in a sense by Marvel as well.
Yeah, I think that because that's a good point that it's strategic and maybe ties in because I was wondering, like, I was kind of like, this Loki show is so successful, and Marvel had to know that this was probably going to be its most successful show. So a little part of me thought it was weird that they had Black Widow in the midst of it, but I guess if there's some sort of correlation, that would be really cool. And so a follow up question to that, and I think I'm on the same page as you, but are we assuming that Loki, this show, is somehow going to really fuck up the multiverse?
I think so. I think WandaVision cracked it, and I think this is going to blow it open in a set, or at least push it further. I think this is going to continue the ball
Yeah.
rolling. I think it will have stuff that leads into the
Hmm.
because again, it's hard to when you have essentially you have WandaVision, you have Loki, you have Spider-Man No Way Home, and then you've got Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. Four projects that are essentially dealing with the multiverse if everything pans out the way it's been predicted and whatnot. So you kind of have to wonder at what point does the ball knock over all the dominoes in a sense?
Yeah,
What point
exactly.
do we suddenly start branching out? And this episode, which when we get to the ending of the episode will kind of make sense, does sort of continue to light that spark of things going
Yeah.
not in a sense of order.
Yeah, the timeline is definitely under threat, which would affect the multiverse. So I'm with you on that. Let's get back into the episode here. We're back in Ravonna Renslayer's office. She's basically like just roasting Mobius for using Loki and botching the last mission. One thing though that we kind of see throughout this meeting, Peter, is she talks with about the timekeepers with very high reverence. She like almost like I wrote down she like worships the timekeepers, and I don't know if that's true, but she clearly is very like bought into this, and whether it be she is corrupt or just believes in it, she's all in on this timekeepers thing.
I totally noticed that, and I kind of also see it as, is she totally in on it, like you said, worships the timekeepers, or is she help perpetuating the front of the timekeepers to about the that like don't push it too far, they know what they're doing, you don't necessarily need to meet them, that whole thing where it's like she's the one that's communicating with them, which again just lends to the sketchiness of the TVA, which never showed up until this Loki moment happened, which is what's so interesting.
Yeah, yeah, it is weird to think about that. Mobius asks about the said timekeepers and does reference that he's never met them, which is another weird thing. If we what are we assuming that maybe Ravonna Renslayer is the only person in the entire TVA who has met these timekeepers? You know, that is
Yeah.
sketchy. That's very sketchy, but we don't know. Renslayer, though, she goes on to say that the timekeepers are monitoring every aspect of this case about the Loki variant, and she's never seen them so involved. Which, okay, I just have this out of pocket theory that I need to throw out there. So I think Kang has been around for a while. Like he has been pseudo in charge of the TVA or whatever because he can time travel. And basically, what he was waiting for to reveal himself was he needed Thanos out of the way. He didn't want to have to deal with Thanos, right? And so
Okay.
that's why the timeline, the sacred timeline, allows the Avengers to use time travel and all this Thanos bad stuff to happen. And the only reason that they have a problem with it, in my opinion, is because this Loki broke off an alternate timeline, which thus created an alternate branch where it is in 2012 where Thanos is alive. What do you think?
It's funny because you're processing all these theories in your mind. You're just like, kind of. I think that's really interesting. I hadn't thought about it that way.
And I don't know if it's the whole part of like Thanos being alive in 2012, if even that's it exactly. I just think that I have the sense that Kang has been waiting patiently to strike, and Thanos getting out of the way is a big thing. And that's why I think on this weird timeline, the Avengers were allowed to go back and mess with it. Because with what we've seen of how the time stream works and people going and becoming variants, it's actually insane that the Avengers pulled that off. It's just
Yeah,
like, what are the odds that like it's just kind of crazy.
and then it's the more you think about these things, it's like the Gamora variant is just allowed to
Yeah,
continue in a sense. Steve and Peggy were allowed to live off their lives, so it's like all of these things just seem so why? Like it makes sense that the villains in the MCU are very patient in a sense, from what we've seen, and it makes sense that with Thanos being out of the way, it almost does go back to the Infinity Stones being powerless at the TVA. And then what also sticks out is the scene in Endgame where the Ancient One is telling the Hulk about, the branches and capping and like, if you remove something, it goes off this way. But her explanation is similar to the TVA explanation. But again, it's like we're barely delving into this time travel thing that you really have to pay attention to the details. But then if you
It's so
overthink
confusing.
it, you just start spiraling of like all these different pathways. But you know that Marvel at the end of the day is going to address all these different pathways.
Yeah, yeah, they better. And one thing I think it might be important to note that this multiverse saga filled with time traveling, all this confusing stuff, might be a little shorter than like the Infinity Stone saga for that said reason of how confusing it can get. Just a thought.
That's the interest. I mean, I don't know. I mean, but again, it's also like, what is this going to launch once we
That's
start
gonna
to
yeah.
crack in the
Maybe
multiverse
there's
and
just more.
secret wars and
Yeah. Never mind. I take that point back. Then that's a good point. Okay. Back in, we have Renslayer gives Mobius one last chance with this variant of Loki. Mobius leaves, and then Loki, after he messes up on their first run back to 1985 and kind of tries to play them all, he tries to give a bunch of excuses. Mobius plays hardball with him, tells him to shut up, says Loki knows this variant is better than him. Loki says that he's 10 steps ahead. Mobius calls him out again and basically says, "Oh, this is what your plan is going to be," and says it step by step by step. And that's how predictable this Loki is. And he does tell Loki, like, "Hey, this is your last chance." And he gives him a bunch of files to go through about the variant. And Loki tries to get the files. He's in this like library. And the first thing he does, instead of looking at the files pertaining the variant, he tries to get the files from the librarian about the creation of the TVA in the beginning and ending of time. Because not only are we interested in that as watchers of the show, so is Loki. Loki is so curious about the TVA, the timekeepers, and this whole idea of stuff being like almost pre-written. The librarian denies him though, says it's all classified, and then Loki goes back to the variant files and he reads about the destruction of Asgard during Ragnarok. He sees the death total. We do actually see that the nickname the Defenders that they gave themselves in Ragnarok is there.
is it the Defenders or the Revengers?
It is the Revengers. That's my bad. Defenders is a different thing.
Okay.
And he makes a big realization though after this, Peter. He goes to Mobius and he tells them that the variant is hiding in apocalypses. And he basically says, and correct me if I'm wrong, that a variant cannot be tracked before an apocalypse because even if something is changed, the apocalypse event will still wipe out everything anyway. So it's like theoretically, like, yeah, no, I don't even need to. I think that makes sense,
It
right?
does make sense. It made more sense when I watched the episode the second time. It made more sense
Mm-hmm.
of like, okay, this makes sense. But again, it just lends itself to the way this show is such a different vibe than Falcon and the Winter Soldier and
Oh
WandaVision
yeah.
because we're really messing with different time. I mean, we jumped to after this explanation, we jumped to Pompeii to
Mm-hmm.
test out this theory, and again, that's the not, whatever the opposite of constraints is that this show has, that it can just go anywhere.
Yeah, the freedom it can do that, and it just
Thank
goes
you.
straight to Pompeii right before the eruption of Mount Vesuvius that kills everyone. Loki releases goats. Shout out to his horned friends because of Loki's comic book costume, the horns, and he has in the MC as well. And then he just yells a bunch of shit, basically telling them that they're all gonna die. And Mobius is shocked to see that the TVA device that tracks this variant energy cannot see Loki or cannot track Loki because Loki's theory was right. When you are in the apocalypse and you're a variant, you can't give off variant energy because nothing you say or do is going to matter because this whole timeline is getting wiped out, whether it be an eruption, like a supernatural event, all that sort of stuff. So,
I do just want to say that because
going, yeah, sorry.
I did jump inadvertently. I skipped the salad scene, which is such
Oh,
a
yeah.
great scene, with using the salad bowl as an explanation for Ragnarok
Mm-hmm.
and taking one of the best MCU movies and putting it into this bowl of salad with salt and pepper happening and juice. It was just, again, this show dances along the line of like super serious with like offbeat comedy that is, with other actors it wouldn't work, and it shows why these characters are such fan favorites with their smaller roles in the bigger movies, and now are really getting to shine through the Disney Plus shows, even though it's only episode 2. Like, that was such a well done scene.
Yeah, he's
their
killing
back
it.
and forth as well was really good.
The combo of those two has been electric, and if we just think about so far on Disney Plus, we've gotten a lot of electric combinations like that. Obviously, Wanda and Vision. You have a good combo of Agatha and Wanda, I would say, as well. Bucky, Sam, and so forth. Of Owen Wilson or Mobius and Loki. But now we'll move on because they go back to the TVA to figure out what apocalypse the variant could be hiding in. And while they're learning about this, they take a little break, and we learn that Mobius loves jet skis. Loves them. Loki asks, why do you read about them if you'll never ride one? And Mobius says it reminds him of what they are fighting for. And the one thing I want to quickly jump in right here, Peter, is I think that Mobius is a variant that was taken from the 1990s and his memory was wiped, and that he just does his job. Because everything that's around him, whether it be the jet skis, the soda he is drinking, the references he makes, are all from the 90s. And I think that all these TVA agents are variants that were pulled, that didn't do that maybe just walked to work wrong one day. And they're pulled from their lives, and they have to go work at the TVA after their mind's wiped. So this is all they know. And that's why Mobius has this, like talking about the jet skis. And later when we see the TVA agent that was trapped by the variant Loki, female Loki, she says she wants to go home, and when they say the TVA, she's like, no, not the TVA. Boom. I think that's 100% right. Peter shook.
I think my brain just exploded because I love that theory. I love that idea. Because again, we have Loki, who's literally an out-of-time variant that was dragged in to do this stuff, which feeds that theory. That is such a good theory.
That's what we got going on.
The 90s, because the jet skis, I was going to say, have to be important for something. You can't just keep reiterating jet skis as for no reason, but damn.
I think we're on to something with that. I think that
I really hope that's true.
Yeah, I also really would like to see my guy Mobius ride a jet ski. That would be sweet. End the season with him just having a good time riding that jet ski. So Mobius, after Mobius says, like, basically the jet skis remind him what he's fighting for and how he believes in the TVA, Loki kind of sends back on that and talks about how absurd the timekeepers are, but Mobius compares it to the gods of Asgard. And when he says it like that, he says basically, if you think too hard about how any of us were created, it's going to sound weird. And I thought that was a really good point, because Loki's making fun of the space lizards, and he's like, dude, how are you from? Your dad is a frost giant, and you were raised by the god of the gods, Odin. Like, settle down, buddy. Your story's just as weird as this. So I really like that.
Yeah, it was such an interesting way that it kind of grounds it back into the outside the MCU reality too, where it's like, if you think about any belief system, you choose to believe in it, and it might sound crazy, it might sound ridiculous to explain to someone, but you're believing it because that's what you're choosing to believe. And I like that, again, the show is really diving into choice and free will and the idea of predetermined fate. Can someone change this path that someone has already claimed for you to be? And I thought that was such an interesting way to make it relatable to regular people, while comparing it to Loki and being with Odin's son and frost giants and stuff that sounds ridiculous, but like you just said, it really brings it down to a base level of understanding for anyone, even if you don't fully understand the MCU. But if you're watching the show, you probably do it to some extent.
Yeah, exactly. And so Mobius goes on, he says, like, the TVA is jokingly his own glorious purpose. It's his life. And he says, like, the timekeepers are working on the end of this story while the TVA agents um, keep everything in track, and when it's done, he'll just rest. And Loki has a good line when he's talking about this because he says, like, you know why I'm not a scared little boy? Because Mobius called him that earlier in the episode. He says, no one bad is truly bad, and no one good is ever truly good. This could be a reference to a couple things. This could be a reference to the timekeepers, which I think is probably what it's going for. This could be a reference to Renslayer. This could be a reference to Mobius himself. And this is obviously a reference about Loki because we know this about him. And what this does, Peter, is it sparks the idea in Mobius's mind of the scared child who he saw with the blue tongue from the gum in the first episode in like the 15 or 1600s in France, right?
Yes.
And he realizes that that gum obviously was not from that time. So what they need to do is they need to track when was this gum sold, and they realized that it was only sold from 2047 to 2051 on Earth. So to track their natural disasters, then, or I guess natural disasters, but it's basically like apocalypses. They need to look in that time frame from 2047 to 2051 on Earth. And that theoretically, in one of those apocalypses in there, because they name a few, is where the Loki variant would be hiding. Is that correct? I feel like I'm
That is correct.
trying
that is
to make.
very. No, you made a lot of sense. I followed that. I did definitely follow that. That was that's the way they came to the conclusion of where to start looking
Mm-hmm.
and do that. But real quick, read Loki's speech about good. You know, no one's fully good or no
Yeah.
one's fully bad. The only thing that I thought about, the way I thought about in that scene was, if I remembered correctly, it would be Thor and Steve Rogers that are the exemption to that. And I guess Vision in a sense, because Vision is able to also wield Mjolnir. So I think the three of them would be the exemption to that theory.
Yeah.
Which could be why Steve was allowed to do what he did in the timeline.
It's. I'm a giant Thor fan, but I don't know if Thor is all truly good.
Right. So again, but I mean, true. When I said Thor, I did have a moment because
But it
truly
would
good
make
would
sense
just
though
be
because he
Steve
can.
Rogers.
Yeah. But Thor is worthy enough. I don't know. That's actually a really good point. Because Steve Rogers is, I guess, the exception, as well as definitely Vision, but Vision is AI, so I don't know how much that counts. Thor, though, I mean, for the most part, besides just arrogance and heartbreak, he never does anything bad.
That's true. He's not Star Lord.
He's not easy, and he's not even Tony Stark, who messes
True.
up, like Bruce Banner, who does stuff. So, no, that's a really good point, Peter. Okay,
Back to the
we'll
gum.
move on. So the gum, 2047 to 2051 on Earth. And so after going through a few apocalypses, they decide that the hurricane that causes floods in Alabama 2050 at a Rocks Cart superstore, think Walmart, is where this Loki variant is hiding. And Mobius has to go convince Renslayer to let them go check it out. And she basically says, hey, if you mess this one up, there's nothing I can do to protect you. I mean, really quick, protect you from who? The timekeepers? Is that what we're supposed to assume,
So I think on the surface, the timekeepers, but on the Marvel nerd hopeful person layer, it's like the other variant. If we're
Mm-hmm.
going off of the timekeepers not being good, I mean, that's where I would go. That's where I kind of hoped, but I've learned to temper my hopes.
Yeah, yeah. That's why when I brought up that Reed Richards thing earlier, I was just like, how are people already fan casting Reed Richards into this? Come on, people. Come on. But so they form a strike response unit with like B-13 and others to go to this apocalypse. We learn that this is a class 10 apocalypse and civilians are hiding in the warehouse of the superstore for shelter. Class 10 means like all these people are just going to die from the apocalypse. So sad, but that's the truth. And Mobius, when they get there, isn't allowed to just go in with just Loki. B-13 says that her and Renslayer decided beforehand, so she'll be with Loki. Turns out to be a mistake. Loki goes with B-13, and then very quickly, Peter, the Loki variant takes control of the strike of the B-13 and starts to talk to our Loki through several proxy bodies. So this is a very important part of this podcast because Peter, I'm giving all the credit and shine to him on this. We have been led to believe because, okay, honestly, what's going to happen is this is the Loki variant or whatever. The person they've been hunting is taking over B-13 and talking to Loki. That's what's happening. You've seen the show if you're listening to this. We have all been led to believe, Peter, that this variant was Lady Loki because his gender was fluid in the last episode. There's been Lady Loki in the comics, and it's just kind of been what everyone has been thinking. But after what we saw, could it be someone else, Mr. Gonzalez? Could it?
Well, my thought process and then my research has led me to believe that this is Sylvie Lushton, if I'm doing the last name correct, who is the Enchantress in the comics, who is very closely tied to Loki in the comics. And then the line that stood out to me is Loki says that basically what this variant is doing is enchantment, which he calls, I think it's like child's play or something. Again, belittling this person's abilities. This person also does not look like comic accurate Lady Loki.
Or any of the variants we saw. Because all the variants we saw in that thing looked somewhat like Hiddleston. Exactly.
Which kind of leads us these sets of theory. I proposed it to Brian over text at some point and in between the podcast and the episode, and it makes sense to me. But again, as time has gone on, I've also kind of wondered, is this going to be Lady Loki, but it's a mashup of both characters through the similar way that Agatha Harkness was kind of created for the MCU, kind of by the comic route, but also different. So I want to say that this is the Enchantress because I feel like that's an interesting foil to Loki.
That would be a big miss if they combined Lady Loki and Enchantress. Enchantress is way big enough to be their own thing. I really think that would be a giant miss if they were like, oh, we're going to combine them. I think you're right. I was so taken back by that theory when you first sent it to me, but the blonde hair, the ties to Loki, the enchantments she was using, we have never seen Loki be able to do. He had to have the Mind Stone to do that sort of stuff. In the alternate language credits, we see that Sylvie is who that's supposed to be. I think you're right. Like, I think you're 150% right. I think this is the Enchantress.
And there is the part where he's looking at the files and it says Sylvie. I know someone blew it up on Twitter. Again, I don't know the credits, but if you zoom in, it says Sylvie Lauf. I can't say the last name properly, but Laufison. Sylvie, who you expect. And if I'm not mistaken, Sylvie was it Oklahoma or was it Alabama?
Oklahoma.
So I think it all kind of makes sense. But again, so much made sense about Quicksilver. So
still not over that.
It's hard, but I like this. I like this idea. We proposed two theories so far in this episode that you and I have both proposed that we're kind of hopeful that are reality, and
we're riding those.
We'll see what happens.
I think I just don't. Why I agree with you, and I think this theory is right, is it just, to me, the Sylvie thing, one, weird. And then just the powers are exactly what the Enchantress is. I went and rewatched, there's this animated show on Disney Plus, like an Avengers animated show, and there's a couple episodes where the Enchantress is in it. I mean, this is just straight up the exact stuff she does. And Loki, again, has to have the Mind Stone to do that.
That's what stood out to me because I was like in Avengers, Loki doesn't even talk to do that.
Yeah.
I want it to be the case.
I think you're right. So these two start talking while she goes through various like proxy bodies. She calls him a fool, and Loki basically they start going back and forth, and Loki tries to enlist her as a lieutenant for him, and they try to. He says, like, I want to take out the timekeepers and run the TVA. It seems
Again, a
that
different level of his plan than he had originally told us.
yeah, and then I think that she's not interested in really ruling the TVA, but I do think she's definitely interested in fucking it up, maybe messing with the timekeepers, because we also find out in a scene as this is going on, Mobius finds the kidnapped TVA agent from earlier in the episode who repeatedly mutters, "It's real, it's real, it's real, it's real," which we don't really understand, and then says, "I want to go home." And then says she's revealed how to find the timekeepers to this Loki variant, which holy shit. So Peter, from here, how would you describe really the back and forth? Because I didn't script it all out because it's just really it's kind of repetitive of them just talking back and forth of who's the better Loki. She clearly thinks that, and even though Tom Hiddleston's Loki does, if we're to assume this is Lady Loki for the purpose of this argument, she seems like a much superior. I mean, she kind of beats the crap out of Loki with like regular human bodies, which is kind of weird for the god, for Asgardian god, but you know.
But I feel like he was never that great of a fighter. If we look back, I don't think he was
Yeah,
that good at fight. Like I don't.
I mean, he's pretty gnarly in Ragnarok when he's got like the knives and.
But without the knives and everything, I mean, I feel like.
I guess, yeah.
So yeah, I did have a little bit of a. I did kind of see the fighting thing as interesting, but what stood out to me that dialogue was Lady Loki, Enchantress, Sylvie character variant never really answered or validated his points when he would say, "I would never do this to me," or there was another line again where he says something to her, and you expect again about being Loki, and I think she says, "Don't call me that," or there's never a clear answer
It's not about you, yeah.
Yeah. And the talking. She's like, "You really do love to hear yourself talk so much," and she's saying, "You yourself talk so much," not as opposed to a Loki who talks so much and talks.
Oh,
and
Peter, we're
those
so
lines.
screwed if this is Lady. I'm so like on board with your theory that I'm now concerned about myself because it's like, but it makes so much sense every level of it. I just do not understand why the hell they would make a female Loki have blonde hair. And I know that sounds just simple and stupid to think that, but like
it's comic book accuracy. Like,
comic book
you
accurate
do so
and,
well in looking like.
And I am simple
It's
and
just...
stupid. So that's what that makes it. I'm like, oh, Loki has darker hair. I mean, come on. I'm just a man. I'm just a simple guy.
And I mean, I think that if we thought that Agatha was just this regular friend to her, and it turns out to be Agatha Harkness, who's ultimately trying to take the powers from her. So I think we have this show, and this show is about duplicity and what things are, not what everything is, not what it seems. So I have to / want to believe that this is a separate character from Lady Loki, and this is Enchantress, who will be a foil or a
ally of some sort.
To him. Because again, we also had the song at the beginning of the episode, which is holding out for a hero, which again, if you're overthinking it like I am, it says, where are the gods, where are the good men, where are all these things, which again, Loki would theoretically be a god that you would think about to come save things. So could this be a person who is why did the person do what they did at the end of the episode? Which I'll let you explain what happened at the end of the episode.
Yeah, so she uses the reset charges to really, really mess up the sacred timeline. She drops them through those like TVA portals to all these specific dates that it flashes through, and a lot of them seem important. There's some MCU connections, but I would just like to say one that stood out to me. Dartmouth, England, or London, Dartmouth, England, wherever that city in 1941 is listed.
Mm-hmm.
Keith Richards and Mick Jagger were born there in 1941 of the Rolling Stones. If there is a timeline without the Rolling Stones, burn it all down. We are fucked if there are no Stones.
I don't think they're going to do that.
There was all these. What's funny though is there's all these like dates, and I was looking at them, and there's all these stuff that ties definitely into like the MCU, and I didn't care about any of that. When I saw Dartmouth, England in 1940, I was like, what are they doing to my boys? What are they doing? So, I mean, what a cameo. If we got Mick and Keith, a cameo, I would lose my mind. That would be the greatest thing ever. That will never happen. So
You don't know. It's Disney Plus. It's the Disney Plus budget. It could happen. It
God,
could
that'd be
happen. But I
sick.
think that's so. I mean, it's because I think I even wrote down a post it somewhere. I'm moving, so I don't even know what happened to the
Yeah.
paper, but like Vormir, Titan,
There's a Holla,
Hala.
and there's New York when probably Steve like was or came back in. I don't know. I don't know. There's definitely some stuff that ties to MCU, and maybe in the future we'll see like that they were teasing some stuff with those dates that we will learn about in maybe Eternals or other stuff. And so after she does this, we see that the timeline just is blowing up. It's all these branches are forming, and on the screen, if it gets to the red bar, it basically means like we're fucked. There's nothing they can do to control that.
It
And
becomes an
they are
Nexus.
rapidly, yeah, like a Nexus event. They're rapidly approaching that in many different eras, different times on the timeline. And so we see Renslayer send out all the troops. This is a giant, giant emergency that is happening. And female Loki slash Enchantress slash Sylvie slash whoever escapes. And Loki stands there for a bit. He is tempted by what she has been saying. Loki is always wants to be around those with the most power. He ditches our guy Mobius, who's running after him, and they disappear. And Renslayer and the troops are heading in, setting us up for what will be a wild, wild third episode. What do you think?
I mean, They said that this series would have more repercussions than the other ones, and I believe it
Oh yeah,
because we just the where how do you not expect repercussions when the timeline is literally bombed? Like how?
I
But
mean,
again, well, go ahead.
I was just like, she like it went just from 0 to 100 so fast. Like we learn about these timelines and we see like the little things that can fuck them up. And then it's like episode 2. Here's the worst thing that could ever possibly happen to them.
In
Because also,
episode 2.
yeah, and the bomb things, the reset charges and where they drop, it's like the most confusing thing in Marvel ever. How it all
I mean,
works.
and it makes sense that the most confusing thing is in a Disney Plus show as opposed to a 2-hour movie where you're kind of don't have the time to let this breathe and the
Oh,
repercussions
exactly.
breathe and kind of here's it makes sense now because of this.
Yeah,
But again,
it would be impossible to watch this in a 3 hour sit down. I mean, you'd be able to do it, but you'd have to watch it a couple more times after because it's so hard to grasp. Like it literally takes these conversations and watching it over and over again. So like literally after we finish recording right now, I'll be like, okay, I understand what I watched last week. And so the idea of doing that in a movie, they wouldn't be able to do a lot of this.
and it's just what's interesting to me is this seems like a very cataclysmic event. But this, whatever this event is, it's not enough to warrant the Eternals getting involved again.
Like,
Because aren't the Eternals supposed to be the ones that help guide things along and like?
yeah, well, the idea of what the Eternals' relationship with the TVA would be is wild. Because if the TVA can mess with an Asgardian, I don't know. I want to get rid of the TVA. I want them to be gone. I don't like the predestined thing, and I know Marvel will get rid of that because they're setting it up to get rid of it. But I
And I
want the
think
TVA to go down and just keep Mobius somehow. Maybe just let him jet ski at the beginning of every movie or something.
I I think we've come to realize that Marvel, for the most part, the authority figure is a bad
Yeah,
character. It is, and it's something that
an
when we were
agency of some sort, never good.
yeah, and then you're like, I think it's an interesting way because we're so programmed to believe that the agency, that the overarching structure is what we're supposed to believe in, that they're the good ones, but
Yeah,
in the end there's all this nefarious purposes going on, and I think the TVA will be similar to, I don't think we'll see the TVA after Loki. I think
yeah.
from what has been theorized, though I do, if you could bring up, you did text me your your a small theory about where the TVA is located.
Oh, okay. So the thought I have about the TVA is because time moves differently there. It seems like it's in a place in between universes, in between the world. Well, where's a place in the MCU where we have been confirmed that time moves differently? It's the quantum realm that we saw in Ant-Man 1 and 2, and obviously, or Ant-Man 2 in Avengers Endgame. That city we see at the end of Ant-Man 2 has long been theoried to be called Chronopolis, which is where what Kang City is. And theoretically, the city that they're in right now, it's not called the TVA. Like we don't know what it is called. And if you look at the Ant-Man 2, that the city is very like elaborate and futuristic. And if it exists in a place where time moves differently, and it is linked to Kang, the TVA, which it is, and Ant-Man 3 is confirmed that Kang is going to be the supervillain, a big part of me thinks that this TVA, because time moves differently and it's kind of separated, where like Infinity Stones and shit aren't working, I think the TVA is in the quantum realm. I think that is a big possibility.
And I think, and when you did tell me this, it made a lot of sense, and it still does, because of of all the factors of we're meant to believe that Endgame had this big overarching impact. Infinity Wars into Endgame had, the world was severely impacted, except for Ant-Man, who was
Mm-hmm.
in the quantum realm. And this seems like, whereas WandaVision launch was a good segue to Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, this one makes sense that this would be a bridge to get us at some point to cross over to Ant-Man Quantumania. Because again, I think the movies are becoming more interconnected with
Yes.
themselves and with the series in a way that you look forward to these things paying off, as
Yeah.
opposed to like it doesn't have a connection.
The Marvel saw what movies like Civil War and Ragnarok do, where you pair superheroes and stuff, and that's the formula they're going to go, and they're for the most part going away from like the normal origin story. But really quickly, what I wanted to say about that theory, one more thing, is a lot of the theories we've given out on here and the things we discuss about, for the most part, come from things that happened in the comic books, right?
Yes.
And sometimes that lets us down. But the one thing when I think about this theory of that it existing in the quantum realm is this is something that has been teased at us in the movies. This is something that came out a while ago. So we've had time to think about what this could be. And so I'm a little more confident in it because it's like I'm not just referencing a 20-year-old comic book that I read that had something similar. It's, well, no, in the story and the world they're building here in the MCU, this makes sense because they need to recognize what that is. And I just think I think if the boot fits, it fits.
It does. I think that this has lent itself to, I think what Loki has done also in a sense is brought us back to what we did with WandaVision, where we really were able to theorize
So
about
much more
things
fun than
that are
Falcon Winter
bigger
Soldier.
picture, that are bigger
Yep.
picture. Whereas as I did love Falcon and the Winter Soldier, it's much more traditional, grounded MCU, and it kind of addressed what was going on Earth and kind of like cleaned it up in a sense. Like this is what's happening,
Mm-hmm.
where we kind of are, and we're kind of setting up who's coming next. Whereas those two, Loki and WandaVision, are really dealing with the way that the MCU is moving outside of Earth, but not necessarily space in a sense. It's dealing into like the mystical, magical,
Yeah.
the quantum realmness of it all, the variants, the different versions, which again could lead, which does speak to Secret Wars.
Mm-hmm. I mean, what? Like, I'll end it with this. You know, two variants who are coming to the MCU: Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield.
Allegedly, supposedly.
I'd bet my life on that.
I want
I'm
to also.
so confident in it. I'm so confident that they're in it.
I just have so much. But watch, they're gonna come. So yes, they come into the MCU, but they're like these random
No, no,
New
no.
Yorkers,
They're
hot
not
dog
they're
stand
not
vendor.
Ralph Bonering me. No, no, no. They're not Ralph Bonering me. That is not going to happen.
We
That
want to
oh
believe
God,
that. We
no.
want to, but that
No.
was that
Oh
was
my
the
God.
biggest.
If it's
I mean,
just
I have
pizza
more.
time. If there's no Spider-Man time and he's literally just a pizza delivery guy, uh,
it would be so.
they couldn't do
But
that. That would break me.
But I think why part of the reason why, if we're operating on the theory that yes, they're coming, I think part of the big reason why it's so negated consistently and vehemently is because this show has made it, Loki especially makes it seem like there's one timeline, the multiverses aren't reality in a sense. But
So we need
at
to
the end of
explode.
Loki, there will be multiverses that are unlocked and exist and are acknowledged and done well in a way that DC cannot do when they do multiverses.
Yeah, which isn't a high bar to set, but here we are. Peter, any more thoughts on episode 2? Any theories before we wrap up of episode 104 here of Pineapple Couch?
I think this episode of Loki was just like I will go with you and say this was probably the best thing we've seen on Disney Plus thus far. It's highly up there with, because again, you have it and you're following along and then you just get punched in the face with a bombing of the sacred timeline, which you're led to believe is so important and so integral. And it leaves it in a place where we have no idea what's going to happen in episode 3. I mean, yes, maybe Lady Loki, Enchantress, Sylvie, variant person, and Loki are interacting more. Theoretically, that could happen, and Mobius is looking for him. But other than that, and they're going to deal with the bombings. But other than that, what is going to happen? Like,
Yeah, I
the
have no
board
idea.
got thrown up in the air,
and that's why I love Loki. I think this is just such a great show for those reasons, because we can have conversations like this, and it's also got great action that is enjoyable to watch in the moment. Yeah, I think we came out with some good theories today. I thought this was a good episode. If you guys have any theories of your own at home, send them on in. We'd love to, or leave a voicemail. We'd love to talk to you about them. Next week, Eric Robinson, big fan of this Loki show, will be jumping in with Peter and I, giving us maybe a little common man perspective of someone who's not obsessed as much with the MCU as Peter and I, and which might be a breath of fresh air for some of you. We'll find out. But Peter, thank you so much for being on. It's always a pleasure doing this. I'm sure I will text you probably in 3 hours with a new theory.
I look forward to it because again, it's like WandaVision. We never stop talking about it.
Never, and that's the recipe for winning on Disney Plus, it would seem. All right, Peter. Talk to you next time.
See ya.
See you guys.